Can you see your recording option at the left of your screen?
Yeah, I do see a red light going on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so you can start.
All right. Hi, my name is Akshay Sehgal. I'm the lead data scientist at Reliance Industries, and I'll be talking about LSTMs today. There are a few prerequisites to the topic of LSTMs. One is that you should be aware of how the neural networks using Keras work. How do you design neural networks using the Keras API? The second is, how does the forward pass and the computation graphs work? Third is having a basic understanding of what backpropagation really is. Third is, since LSTM is a technique that is based on top of RNNs, so basic understanding of what RNNs are and how do they work is also necessary. And lastly, you should understand how different activation functions work, such as tanh and sigmoid functions. So yeah, let's start with how do we handle sequence data. So this is an open problem, and a lot of work has been done on this for last since I guess 2013. Sequence data is any form of data that where the sequence of information is important, and it's necessary to preserve that so that you can model it. And a few examples of sequence data are text, stock prices, the sensor signals, DNA sequences. You have sound signals, you have customer purchase history, and so on and so forth. So before we get into it, let's take a small example of why sequence is the information in a sequence quite important. So let's go back to the childhood school curriculum for mathematics, right? Everybody would have gone through learning how to multiply numbers, right? The different multiplication tables that we would be memorizing. And initially, for the first few numbers, it's quite easy for you to really understand what is happening. But as you start getting into the 18s, 19s, 20s, you kind of just memorize it based on based on just reading it again and again and again. So it's not exactly that you understand how to multiply each of those numbers. What you're really doing is developing a sort of a persistent memory so that you can really understand what you can really kind of in a sequence say what is happening. The same is true with the alphabet, for example. So when you say A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on, if I tell you to say that backwards, or if I tell you to start in the middle of that sequence, and I tell you to say start from G and now end till Z, the initial few alphabets would be slightly difficult for you because you don't really know where you started off. And once you understand, G, H, I, and then going forward, your speed really picks up. And that truly shows how persistent memory and sequence data really works and is stored in our own memories. So that's where the fundamentals of sequence data come in. The bag of words approach is a very popular approach. I'm sure everyone would have used this approach to model text data. But the bag of words does not really preserve the sequence. It kind of preserves the context in a sense where you know what words are being talked about. So at a very high level, you understand the context. However, context is not it also requires some amount of information around sequence. So essentially what people realize that for modeling sequential data, you need some sort of a temporal architecture, which is a time-based architecture in neural networks. And this architecture is usually to simulate some form of memory. The basic architecture of all sequence-based models, apart from the few techniques that are slowly coming up nowadays, but in the realm of what we are talking about right now, primarily RNNs, LSTMs, and GRUs, the attempt is to iteratively, which from where the word recurrent comes in, encode a sequence into itself so that you can create a embedding or a vectorized implementation of a sequence which encodes the information about not only the context or the words that are coming in, but also about the sequence in which those words are coming in. And each step that you take in this iterative process is called a time step. But this is not actually a, you're not really modeling time into it. You're just modeling steps. So now, a few of the applications where predictive, where sequence data is modeled via RNNs, LSTMs, and GRUs is, obviously predictive classification based models. You have natural language understanding. You have part of speech tagging. You have machine translations, which is a very, very big and still an open research area for sequence models, and of course, natural language generation. These are some of the sectors where it is used. Any questions till now around why do we require to handle sequence data slightly differently? Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So what is an RNN? We'll go with the architecture of an RNN first, because we want to understand why is there a requirement for an LSTM in the first place. So an RNN is basically recurrent neural network. It is not exactly a model of its own, but it's a layer in the model which gives you encoding, which allows you to encode sequential data in a vector representation. What do I mean by that? If you see the diagram out here, are you able to, Tanvi, are you able to see my mouse cursor?
Yes, I am.
Okay, cool. So we'll talk about this diagram. So an actual implementation of the RNN is what I'm however, difficult to this is, and we do control steps. See how we get to type, you're trying to encode what time is it. That's the sentence that you're trying to encode. So the first word is going to be what, right? And that through an RNN produces an embedding called H0, right? This is a vector representation of a certain dimensionality that gets produced. Now, this H0 is also passed into the next time step, which is basically flowing back into the RNN alongside the next word, which is the X1. So the X1 and the H0, the embedding for the first word, gets passed on to the RNN again to produce H1. And this keeps happening iteratively or recurrently till you produce, you go through the whole sentence and you produce HT. Now, this is your hidden state of the RNN, which represents the whole sentence. However, we don't only use this particular hidden state. So what we also use in RNNs is sometimes all of these hidden states. So H1, H0 basically represents the embedding for what. H1 represents the combination of embeddings for what and time, and so on. So HT basically represents what time is and the complete sentence, the embedding for that. But sometimes, primarily when we want to stack RNNs one on top of the other, we would be returning, instead of just using the HT embedding, we would be using all of this. However, if we wanted to do a classification over the sentence, we would just return HT because that would be enough to represent the sentence. Now, mathematically, how does that work? It's nothing very complicated. You basically are doing the same thing you would do in any normal neural network in a specific neuron. You would be taking taking the xt, you would be multiplying it to a weight matrix, and you would be applying a tanh activation function. However, since we have two inputs in this particular case, we have two weight matrices. One is multiplied to the previous ht minus 1 hidden state, and the other one is multiplied to the xt, right? So the activation function of that produces ht, produces ht, which is then multiplied to another another weight matrix to produce xt. So that's how you were trying to trying to model sequence data in an RNN. Now, what were the problems with an RNN? One of the major problems with an RNN was that it was quite difficult to embed long-term dependencies. What does that mean? Since you are going in a sequential manner and embedding all the different words, the amount of information that you keep capturing into the next step slowly decreases, right? And this is where the problem comes in. There is no way of increasing the contribution of a particular concept onto another word going ahead. And that also gives rises to another problem, which is called the vanishing gradient problem, which comes in when you're talking about a backpropagation process. So we'll look into this diagram very quickly. We don't have to get into the crux of it, but this is basically a computation graph of an RNN. Now, F out here is your binary cross entropy, which is your loss function that you are going to use to model this particular neural network. So now when you're trying to compute it, F depends on the cost of the first word, the cost of the second word, and the cost of the third word, right? And those individually depend on the P4, P3, and P2 values that you are computing, which also depend on the hidden state of that particular word at that particular time step, and so on. However, this is not a this is an acyclic graph, because H kind of depends on the previous hidden state, as we saw in the previous slide, that you were in your forward pass, you are computing it in such a way where you take in the previous hidden state and you combine it with the current input. So what you end up getting is when you try to compute the partial derivative of the loss function to the weights, what you end up getting is, for the first few words that you're talking about, the computation is not that small. But as you keep going further and further from the word, going back in time, the number of derivatives that you have to keep multiplying together keeps increasing. What ends up happening because of that is that when you multiply numbers which are smaller than 1, you start getting smaller and smaller and smaller numbers. And since you use the derivative to understand what magnitude of step you need to take to adjust the weights, which is your backpropagation, what ends up happening is the model starts saying that the word that comes in the start, which is very far away from the current word that you're looking at, has very less contribution to the current word, and that's where this is the vanishing gradient problem. Now, these two problems, alongside some other problems that were identified with the RNNs, were resolved by one of the architectures that was called LSTMs, which stands for long short-term memory. Before we get into what exactly an LSTM does, we'll look at how do we really work with an RNN chain, and how is it similar or different as compared to a LSTM chain. So an RNN chain takes in one word at a time, gives out one embedding, and then passes that to itself in the next time step. And as you keep passing this via tanh activation, you essentially create a sequence, a sequential model to encode the embedding of xt minus 1, xt, which are all of these are words. Similarly, an LSTM chain also works exactly the same, but the difference is that the architecture, that the stuff that happens inside that particular cell, is slightly different, right? So we'll get into this in a little more depth in the next slide. So an LSTM architecture comprises of 3 gates. The first gate is called a forget gate. The second gate is called an input gate, and the third gate is called an output gate. A gate is where you are taking some sort of a decision. right? And the best activation function for any decision problem is a sigmoid function, because you're sending out a value between 0 to 1. 0 meaning that there is no information to be passed, and 1 meaning that you want to pass all of the information. Tan H activation function in this case can also be seen as a squashing function, used to readjust the values between 1 to -1, right? And we'll get into each of these in a little bit of time. But first, we should look at an implementation. Just give me a second. Yeah, are you able to see the Jupyter notebook, Tanvi? Hello.
Yes, Akshay. We can see this.
Okay, all right, cool. So I'm assuming that everyone knows how Keras works. So we're going to import our dependencies, and we're going to take IMDb data set for as an example. The classification problem being positive reviews or negative reviews. Since the computation time of LSTM is quite heavy, so we're going to only take the 5,000 words as a vocabulary. So there are 25,000 samples in the trainings, 25,000 different sentences. And as you can see, this is the complete vocabulary for the IMDb dataset. Now, each word is represented by an index value. So when you start looking at the training data, you see a list of numbers. These numbers represent corresponding indexes in the vocabulary. So each of these is a sentence. So the first sentence, if you look at the length of this particular sentence, you are seeing a 218 word sentence. This is a review that has been given by somebody, and the corresponding Y value for this is 1, meaning that this is a positive review. Now, if you really want to get the sentence back, this takes a little time to run. Just give it a second. Yeah, so we'll continue. Now, when you want to work with an LSTM, you would want that each and every sentence is of the same length. So what that means is that you would want to do some sort of a padding. So let's assume that you're trying to set each of the reviews to a length of 500. So this particular 218 length review, after using the Keras API for padding the sequences, you end up with 500 length vector, which is of this form only. However, the remaining places you end up adding zeros. Now, we'll go into a very simple model of how the LSTM, how to use an LSTM, and then we'll analyze the layer and what's happening out there. So now you're passing as an input a 500 length sentence that becomes your input sequence. This is how you put it as a tensor. Now, before you hand it over to the LSTM, you need to have an embedding layer. The embedding layer's purpose is to open up each of those representations for the word, which you see out here. So this is a single word, this is a single word. It opens these up into its own, vector. So you have 5,000 different words. You set a length of what sort of a vector representation. So this is where you can think of this as a word embedding. So in word embeddings such as word2vec and so on, though there you use a 300 dimensional or a 200 dimensional vector. Out here we are using a 32 dimensional vector that represents every word. So what you're saying is that this is a 32 dimensional vector of 5,000 different words, and this is your input C length for 500. So when you pass this to an LSTM layer, where you're saying that you are going to have 100 different LSTM cells, I'll come into the come to this in a little while. You can then connect all of these LSTMs to a single prediction value, which is a sigmoid function, which has a sigmoid function activation with a binary cross entropy optimizer and an Adam. A binary cross entropy loss and an Adam optimizer. So what you end up getting is the architecture of the LSTM classification model looks something like this. The running of this takes a little bit of time, but as you can see, the accuracy is not that bad on training and test. Now, it's important to understand what is happening out here in the layer itself. So I have separated the layer, and I'm using a few more parameters out here, which we will talk in a lot more detail alongside the architecture. So if you can remember, there is an HT output, which comes at the end of the LSTM chain, the unrolled LSTM. So when you say that you want to return sequences, what you're doing is you're not only returning that HT value, you're returning all the values at each time step that it was calculating. So H0, H1, and so on. So if you can see that the first, when I set these return sequences and return state to true, you end up getting 3 values instead of just the HT, which is a hidden state for the complete sentence. The first one has 2 channels. So obviously the first channel for any neural network, where the question mark is being represented, is the number of samples, number of sentences that are going through. However, there is another channel out here specifically for the first output. So the first output is this return sequence, which this is the H0 to HT, which is your complete sentence. So in this case, this would be 500, right? So you from the 100 LSTM cells, each of the LSTM cell is returning a sequence of 500 hidden states that it has computed over time. Now, this is very, very useful. And this is what is used when you are going to stack one LSTM on top of another, right? An LSTM, like any other sequential model, requires a sequence of data. Now, if you want to stack multiple layers of LSTM, you cannot just provide it with a single value of HT, which is the default output of the previous LSTM layer. So what you end up doing is you provide it with the complete sequence of what the previous LSTM has computed over each time step, which is a sequence of hidden states, and then you provide that to the next LSTM. So this, you usually set this equal to true when you have to, stack another LSTM below this. However, the second one, so second output, this is your, default output that you usually get. And the third output is something called cell state, and we'll get to this in a while. But this kind of represents information about memory, and that's where the LSTM comes in. So we'll just go back. We'll come back to this code once again when we want to analyze more. But we'll just go back to the slides and really understand what is happening. Just give me a second. Yeah, can you see my presentation? I'll assume that
I am able to see Akshay.
Okay, any questions till now?
No, not as yet. Your screen has like it's blank.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I'm saying, have you switched your screen?
Yeah, I'm on the presentation right now. Are you able to see that?
No.
Okay. Let me pause and then resume sharing again. So I'm on the presentation now.
Yeah. Okay. I'm able to see this whole palette which says charts, tab, text, shape, media, comment.
Nope. I'm on the LSTM cell architecture.
No. I probably would want to, minimize and then probably open it again.
I'm actually on a Mac. So let me just stop sharing and share again. Would that be okay?
Sure. Yeah.
So let me know if you are able to see the presentation. Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can now.
Okay, awesome. Okay, cool. So yeah, let's get into the depth of the LSTM architecture and really understand what it brings to the table. And now, since you understand how to implement it and what are the different parameters and how you really place it into a neural network model, you'll kind of relate to each of these components and understand what's happening. So let's talk about the first most important concept that the LSTM brings in. So this is your cell state. Now, a cell state, what is the purpose of a cell state is to carry information from one time step to another. This is kind of compared to a conveyor belt that carries information about what to remember and what to not remember. So in an LSTM cell, the cell state is represented by C, and CT minus 1 is what is fed into the next time step of the same LSTM cell. And then based on some computations that happen inside the LSTM, it gives out CT. We'll go to those computations, but all the different gates, the purpose of these different gates is to write information on this particular conveyor belt. And apart from this, obviously, since you do require the hidden state to be carried from one LSTM time step to another, since this is very similar to an RNN, that is also what you give out as an output. So unlike an RNN, which has only a single output from each time step, which is a hidden state, you are providing multiple outputs, one being the hidden state and the other one being the cell state. And that is what you, if you remember the third value that is there when we set the sequences and the state is equal to true, that is what was being returned by the LSTM tensor. So we'll get into the first gate. The first gate is called the forget gate. The forget gate's purpose is to multiply onto the previous cell state what information to forget about. Now this is very complicated to understand in terms of how does it really do that, because since it's a black box, the model itself decides what weightages to increase and what weightages to decrease. That's where the black box thing of the model comes in. But if you think about it mathematically, what you're trying to do is for any algebraic problem, you have an inner product and an outer product. An inner product adds information, while because it's reversible, and so a sum is a product. Sum is an operation, an inner operation that you can do, so you can add information. But when you multiply or divide something with something, it becomes an irreversible problem, right? So whenever you're doing an operation like that, you are modifying the current state of the whole system to make it irreversible. And this is where the forget gate comes in. So what you do essentially in the forget gate, like any other neuron, is basically, it has an activation function of sigmoid, which is shown out here. It takes in the previous hidden state from the previous time step, concatenates it to the current word, which is your xt, multiplies it with weight matrix, adds a bias, and then puts an activation function, and this becomes the vector ft, right? So this ft signal is then we'll get into that in more detail, but it is multiplied to the current time step, which is coming from the previous one, the cell state from the previous time step. So that's what the forget gate does. The input gate also does a similar computation. The input gate exactly has the same computation as the previous one, sigmoid function. It has its own weight matrix. It concatenates the hidden state of the previous time step, the current word, and adds a bias and returns an IT. However, this IT is not enough to write information on the cell state. So what you end up doing is a process called reinforcing a particular signal. This is very common in other neural network architectures, such as if you work with ResNet and similar architectures. What you end up seeing is that since the amount of information you want to convey to the next step of the architecture gets lost as you're doing certain computations, you take the input again and you combine it again with the particular time step. So what you do out here is you have the CT signal, which is calculated as the tan H, which is basically the squashed version of uh, of the hidden state and the concatenation of the hidden state and the input word, multiplied to its own weight matrix with its own bias. So essentially, this is your just the squashed version of your input information to the next time step, and this is the decision function that is there, which is also computed using the same information. However, it has its own different weight matrix and its own bias. You combine these two together using a pointwise multiplication operation, and this is shown out here. So essentially, your write operations onto the conveyor belt, which is your cell state, are done as follows. The previous value is multiplied with a forget signal. The information that you want to remember, the input of the hidden state and your current word, is multiplied with a decision function, that is IT, and these are summed together to write the new CT, which is your new cell state, right? And this is what acts as the memory of what to remember and what to not. Now the output gate works in a similar manner, but the purpose of the output gate is to generate just the hidden state for the next step. So what you do essentially is, again, very similar to all the other gates, the same computation with its own weight matrix and its own bias, with a sigmoid function that is provided to the hidden state. However, one small difference is that whatever cell state that you have calculated on top, you take that and multiply to the HT. So all of these computations are very simple, and you're just deciding where to multiply and where to add. That's basically the beauty of this whole computation graph that is there inside an LSTM cell, and that's what turns into a short-term and a long-term memory, where you decide what words to forget about and what words to carry forward. An example of why you would want to now forget information. Let's say you are talking about a sentence that contains information about the gender of a person, right? And you're talking about the same subject right now. So in an RNN, since that is the same statement, you would encode that information and carry it forward till the end, which may or may not cause problems if a new subject suddenly gets entered into the information. Let's say you're talking about two different people and you have mentioned a gender before, which has to do with a particular person, but not the second subject. So an RNN would not understand what to do with that information. It would consider that gender to be associated with every word that is there in that particular sentence. However, an LSTM has the capability, if trained correctly, to forget about the gender with respect to the second subject when it comes into the sequence, right? So as you are modeling, it understands what particular information to keep with respect to that particular subject and what information to forget. And that's where the beauty of these computations come in. So now we'll just quickly go back to the code and just try to analyze what is happening in the LSTM again. Are you able to see the Jupyter notebook, Tanvi? Hello. Okay, I'll assume that you're able to see that. Okay. So now whatever we have seen in the presentation till now is a single cell, right? However, we are putting 100 different cells out here. What that means is a single cell out of these 100 is going to do that complete computation of all the time steps that you saw. So there is a difference between an LSTM cell and a particular time step. So if I'm saying that the sequence that I'm inputting into the LSTM is 500 length, as in this particular case, there are going to be 500 time steps, which is basically 500 iterations of encoding that recurrently keeps happening onto the same cell, right? But I'm sending out 100 different, 100 different such, encodings to the next layer. What that means is I'm basically creating 100 different sequential features, right? So an LSTM that we looked at from the presentation was me trying to generate a single feature for the whole sentence, right? And that's the beauty of deep learning. You try to create ways of uh, auto-generating features which encode certain specific type of information. So in this particular process, if you look at it, your neural network is a very basic neural network, which says that I'm inputting 100 different features and I have a single decision function at the end of it. So it's very similar to a logistic function that is happening right now, since you have a sigmoid function at the end. So 100 parameters and one particular output, which is being computed using a binary cross entropy. So you get a value of 0, 1, a value between 0 and 1. However, what is happening on top is slightly different. What you're doing is you're providing each and every LSTM cell with a 500 sequence, meaning that each cell has to take 500 different time steps, 500 recurrent iterations for encoding the information, and the information is provided as 32-bit vectors. 32 length vectors. So these 32 length vectors can be considered as, each word is represented by a length of 32 different numbers. Now, if we go to the next part, what is happening out here? So the default output is the second one, which is what we are doing in the previous cell out here, right? We're taking 100 different features, and then this is what is provided for each feature. For each sample, 100 different features are extracted using your 100 different LSTM cells and provided to the output layer. Now, if I were to stack another LSTM on top of this, what that would essentially mean is that whatever sequential information the LSTM is able to encode, maybe that is not enough. Maybe we want to have another layer where that SQL information is further processed into new features. Let's say, again, 100 dimension, 100 different cells are provided. Another layer is provided, which is a copy of this particular layer. What I would essentially end up doing is I would set this to return sequence is equal to true. And what this does is, instead of now returning 100 values, this is going to return tensor that has 2 channels. So this is a three-dimensional tensor. So the first channel being for the one sample that we are providing, or whatever the batch size is. The second is going to be your number of time steps, because each LSTM has the capability to provide H0 to HT. So in this case, your HT is, your T value of T is 500 time steps. So this information, this sequence of outputs that this particular LSTM provides, which is H0 to HT, is then provided to this particular LSTM, which does not then return any other sequence, but now acts as your primary features that go into your decision function in their output layer, which becomes your prediction. So this is how an LSTM works. Now, I'll just quickly go back to presentation. Yeah. Now, apart from all the different applications that I talked about, right? You can use it for multiple different problem statements. You can use it to process any form of sequential text data. You can use it to perform computations over signal information. Stock prices is a very good place where you would want to use something like an LSTM, because they not only have short-term fluctuations, but you also want to capture long-term trends that are there. So an LSTM kind of remembers for that particular sample or that particular distribution that you're providing, it remembers the long-term dependencies as well as the short-term fluctuations that are happening in the signal. But one of the core applications that you would really want to start working with when trying to explore LSTMs is machine translation, and this is a very, very cool application of this particular type of model. These are called sequence to sequence models, and there's a lot of research going on sequence to sequence models, specifically around the area of something known as attention. We'll not talk about that in this particular demo, but an attention layer is another method of understanding which part of the sentence do you really want to pay attention to while performing the sequential encoding and decoding. So the architecture of a particular sequence to sequence model for, say, machine translation, or it can also be used as question answering bot. So this problem statement is known as SQUAD, SQUAD. There's a Stanford database available open source, and a lot of people compete to create the best model which can take a particular question and give a particular answer correctly, machine generated answer. So an LSTM architecture is utilized out here in terms of an encoder and a decoder, right? This architecture you've seen before. You take the different words, you create an embedding layer, and you provide it to an LSTM layer that is encoding this information sequentially. And at the end of this particular one, you get the HT, the hidden state of that particular sentence. Now, what you then do is you have another LSTM that is trying to now predict, see in a sequential manner, what are the different words that should come, given that the context vector or the hidden state of this whole sentence is this, right? Now you can imagine that the complete information that you have is encoded in this particular vector. And if you are training it to, say, do a machine translation, what that means is the complete context of the sentence, say, hi, how are you? That is captured in a vector representation that comes out of the encoder. And then you have a decoder that takes this particular as vector representation as an input, and then tries to predict in a sequence what will be the different words that would come in that particular language, say German. So an English sentence can then be translated as a German sentence. Now, one of the issues that you would see in this particular architecture is very clearly is, what if the number of words that number of time steps that I have in English do not really encode, do not really work out to be the same number of time steps that I require in German. So hi, how are you would take about 5 or 6 words to say, but maybe in German it is just 3 words. So how do you handle that? That's where you add these different masks. So you have these tokens that you add, which are part of the prediction, which say that, this is the start of the sentence and this is the stop of the sentence. So before you even start predicting the different words in that particular language, you first start off with the start word, and then you also predict when do you want to end the sentence. So given a sufficient size of the translation, you should theoretically be able to predict a complete sentence of variable length, variable length in terms of the English counterpart as well as the German counterpart. So that's one very cool application, and you can very easily see how a question answering bot can also be created via something like this, or maybe something like a chatbot, for example, can be created out of this generative chatbot. So this diagram is basically that of a generative chatbot. So whenever you say hi, how are you, it has been trained to take this particular sequence and decode it in terms of an answer saying I'm good, right? So this is one very cool application of bots like this, of sequential models like this. And a lot of more reading can be done through some of these links. Specifically, so this is the research paper that talks about LSTMs and RNNs in a lot of detail. An LSTM implementation is provided out here by this particular link, and these Oxford Deep Learning NLP lectures give you a lot of insight into how backpropagation works across sequential models. In fact, this particular information, this particular diagram has actually come from there itself. So it gives you a very intuitive way of seeing what is the vanishing gradient problem and how do computation graphs for different sequential models actually work. So yeah, I think I've covered the basics of the topic, and yeah, that's it from me. Any questions that you have?
Akshay, are you have you are you done from your side?
Yes, I'm done from my side.
All right, okay. So we do not have any questions as yet. It was
Okay.
indeed a very good presentation. Okay,
All right.
so what we'll do is we'll discuss it with team and other our faculty as well,
Sure.
and give us till time till Tuesday, I guess.
Sounds
And
good.
I'll keep you posted, or maybe I'll keep Karthik posted, and then accordingly we can just get in touch with again.
Sure, sounds good.
Right?
All right.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.